Hello everyone, welcome back to the dump and also the 12 Days of Deltarune. So like I said last time, if you didn't watch my last theory video as part of the 12 Days of Deltarune, I guess my last major theory video, these are ideas I had for videos quite a while ago that I scrapped, and now we're bringing them back. Again, I don't think they're bad ideas, they just didn't end up happening at the time. So today we are going to talk about the Dess is human hypothesis. Before you write a comment, I see you down there. I see you. I want you to know, I am not here to support Dess is human as a theory. I'm also not going to say it is stupid and dumb and has no basis in reality. This is an exploration of the theory more so than me, giving my own opinion on it. Because just like Rudy Knight, a theory that I don't think will be true, but has some basis in the actual text of Deltarune, I think the Dess is human theory, while I do not think Dess will actually be human, I do think it points to something interesting about her character, and by examining it, we can figure that out. So that is essentially the point of this video. Plus, at the end, I do kind of have my own theory about something related, but not this. So stay tuned. So I asked my subscribers in a community post for their best piece of evidence to support the Dess is human hypothesis. Most of these people also couched these points by saying, well, I don't really believe this, but... So, might not be the most representative group, but hey, I do think we've got some interesting points to talk about here. So first up are the things that only one person mentioned. The toilet in the holiday house. So somebody brought this up because monsters don't use toilets, at least not in Undertale. This is part of kind of a major theory about potentially monsters now not having bodies made of magic in Deltarune, but physical bodies that could bleed. You might have heard that one before. However, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't think we've been anywhere other than the Holiday Mansion or the Dreamer household that would have a bathroom that we can enter. I don't think we've ever entered a bathroom anywhere else. Presumably the school should have bathrooms, but we don't see one there. And that could be evidence that monsters don't need bathrooms, or it could be evidence that bathrooms just aren't that important to to a story that's being told. Like, you also don't see bathrooms in, like, Halo or, other places where humans definitely do use the bathroom. And the two places that we do see bathrooms are both places where some significant scene takes place in there. Asgore being alone in the bathroom is important. He could be alone in, like, Carol's room, right? But Kris going into the bathroom, especially in the weird route, is very important, so that no one will disturb them. So, it could mean something that the holidays have a bathroom, maybe because they also had a human child, or it more likely probably doesn't mean anything. I guess there's also the alternative explanation that the holiday house has a toilet because Kris used to hang out there a lot and they're rich. So why wouldn't they? Anyway, unexplored Undertale concept. So the idea behind this is that a lot of stuff in Deltarune is stuff that was not explored in Undertale. So for example, the Spamton Neo fight is very much meant to evoke Mettaton Neo, right? Here's the thing, though. If we are going to have a fight against a human in this game, which is what this unexplored concept would mean, why would it not be Kris? Like, on one of the routes, pretty much no matter what, it'll make sense to have a fight against Kris. If that's what Toby wanted to do, he could. So why do we need Dess to also be human to have that be possible? You know what I'm saying? Dess wanted to visit the big city. Maybe that's because she wanted to be among fellow humans. That's an interesting idea, one I hadn't thought about before. However, I think it's more so meant to just be a sign that Dess doesn't want to stay in hometown forever. She doesn't want to, live a cozy little life in hometown. She has big dreams. And finally, that Dess and Kris are paralleled in the Mantle game. In the Mantle game, in one of the rooms, there's a monster that mirrors your movements, like the player's movements. And if you strip back some of the code, you can find a variable actually changes it to look like a Black Dreamer monster sprite, which is what we see in game, versus what is actually, underneath those layers, which is a Black Deer sprite. Maybe they both weren't actually a deer monster and a dreamer type monster. Maybe they were both human and that's why they both share the same color. I don't know. It's interesting. I don't think it holds that much water, but if Dess was human, we could look back on that and say, oh, interesting. Hey, do you guys remember Rules Night? Do you remember how Rules Night was predicated? Yeah, it was some very specific wording, right? Well, we've got more very specific wording. In the Dog Shrine, in the Xbox version of Undertale, if you talk to Sans, you can get a line of dialogue where he says, Papyrus, the yellow kid, the antlered girl, and her big sis sometimes come to play games here. The specific text of the antlered girl, so Noelle, and her big sis leaves some room for interpretation that her big sis might not also be an antlered girl. Here's the thing, though. I think most likely the reason it is worded like this is so that we understand what we're talking about coming back. Because saying the antlered girls doesn't necessarily nail down that this is Noelle and Dess, right? Like, it probably would be, but what if there's, we've already come up with the idea that Sans' brother in Deltarune might not actually be Papyrus. So surely if this line was any more vague on that, we could come up with the idea that maybe Noelle has a different sister in this world or something like that. This guarantees it's a big sister, which immediately makes us think of Dess, who is an important character. The only other way I can think to phrase this that would actually retain this information is the very clunky, the antlered girl and her antlered big sis, which doesn't work at all. Obviously, we didn't know these characters' names yet, so you couldn't call them by name either. So yeah, I really think this is just a case of very specific wording because of the fact this is supposed to be a little vague, because it's like a foreshadowing. The heart pillows. Of all the things related to Dess, the heart pillows confuse me the most. We don't really know what monster souls look like in Deltarune. Maybe they do have colors, like the human souls did in Undertale, and maybe Dess had a red soul. But even so, why was Carol obsessed with giving her pillows shaped like her soul? That's so weird. Whether she was human or not, this is strange. I don't think it really necessarily leads to the idea that she was human, even though they look like human souls. I get where it's coming from. But at the same time, we don't know why Carol was giving these to her. Or maybe Carol just liked them and Dess was stealing them for some reason. Alright, and now we get to the two most prevalent pieces of evidence, in quotes, but And that would be Dess and Kris's inexplicable bond and the closet shoes. So let's start with the slightly easier one to explain, which is the closet shoes. Dess has a bunch of shoes in her closet. They look like they would be just normal human shoes. So, does that mean she was human? Well, there's a lot that says no. For one, in her box of junk, you can find shoes fit for hooves, which doesn't necessarily imply she wasn't human. Like, maybe the Holiday family can only get shoes made for hooves, and so Dess had to make do with those. In a similar way to, like, Kris couldn't grow horns, so they wore the red horned headband to pretend, right? However, there's this line from Noelle, from chapter 2, where she says, I don't really do shoes. At least not unless they're custom made. In other words, they don't make shoes fit for hooves. These are all custom made shoes fit for hooves. And that kind of repaints this in an entirely different way, doesn't it? This pile of shoes isn't, indicative of Dess being human and having to try to make do with monster equipment. It kind of paints it like this isn't a thing monsters do, but Dess wanted shoes anyway. So, on the topic of Dess and Kris's inexplicable bond, I do think this did kind of blindside us. In Chapter 2, when we first learn about Dess and everything we could learn about Dess until 3 and 4 dropped, it really seemed like Dess and Kris were kind of rivals, right? Kris was scaring Noelle, Dess was hitting them on the head with a baseball bat. And then after that, it really seems like the two are friends, like close friends. In fact, Ram, I'm bringing this up again, but talks about Kris and that girl playing games with the objects that would later become the Darkners from Dark Worlds 1 through 3. And really, it only makes sense for this girl to be Dess, because these Darkners appear in the Chapter 1 through 3 Dark Worlds created by the Night. And so, what if the reason we didn't hear about this relationship before is because we were getting information about Dess from Noelle's perspective? Noelle was someone that didn't like scary things. She was, in fact, always scared. So maybe Kris and Dess and Azrael perhaps too, but at least those two, would do more extreme things that Noelle wasn't there for. And so they had a bond with each other that Noelle didn't really see. Because whenever she was around, Kris would bully her. And that became the dynamic of the group. Does that make sense? Some other quick problems with the human Dess theory. This is probably my biggest problem with it, is that it thematically undermines Kris's place as the town's most obvious outcast. Kris being the only human is kind of important to their character. If there was another human before, I feel like a lot of the spice that is added to the story of Kris wanting to be a monster is less interesting. You know what I mean? Like, if Dess had already gone through all that and was coaching Kris through it, I feel like it's a little bit less interesting. Dess also exists in Undertale, like we just said earlier. She's heavily implied by Sans and also Asgore in the alarm clock dialogue. And if she was a human, would Asgore kill her? I don't know. Who knows? But it is something to consider. And finally, the library book about human care is only noted to have been taken up by Toriel. The fact the book's even in the library to begin with could imply that maybe Carol bought it originally for it to be placed there or something. But, it isn't brought up at all. And maybe that's because it's supposed to be a twist. But there is, that you do have to consider that. All right. So if Dess isn't human, then why? Why does she want these shoes? Why does she want to go to the big city? Why do she and Kris have this inexplicable bond? Well, even if Dess wasn't human, she sure seemed to want to be. And this would be my take on it. A couple people said this in the post too. So this isn't like an uncommon opinion, I don't think. I'm not breaking new ground, but Dess wanted to be a rock star. She wanted to go to the big city. In other words, she wanted to be important. Unfortunately for her, she's part of a matched set. The holiday family have a naming scheme. They're all supposed to like the same things, Christmas and candy canes and snow. And in doing so, they boxed Dess into this place she didn't want to be. And interestingly, Kris is the exact opposite, right? How Kris has been characterized as a child is someone who wants to fit in desperately, but can't because they are special. They are the only human in town. And so you can see how these two might be drawn together. The monster who wants to be human and the human who just wants to be a monster. They know each other's pain. They're both the outcasts from their families, even if their families want to love them. You know? People just don't understand them. And also, they're both best friends with Azrael, so who knows? Maybe that's, maybe those three hung out more and Noelle only sometimes came along. It's hard to say. But I do think that Dess wanting to be human is important. Even if it's not as literally spelled out as that, the idea that she wants to be special, and in doing so, she is trying to be more human, I think is important. And that's really where it comes down to with the shoes. The shoes are something that humans wear, primarily. I mean, some of the monsters probably wear shoes. I'm trying to remember one off the top of my head. It's pretty hard. I think maybe the Flame Girl wears shoes. I think Caddy wears shoes, but maybe only when she's at work. Regardless, it's not a common thing for monsters to do. And so it would make Dess stand out. And that's why I think she has a pile of shoes. Maybe she tore through them all the time, so her parents just bought her a pile of them so she'd, be happy and wouldn't have to wait for another custom make. And I think it goes beyond just this. I think the shoe is Dess's symbol. In Chapter 2's Dark World, there is a section where you have to arrange some shadows. We've gone past the analysis part into the theory part now, okay? There are 5 shadows here. A bluebird, a green wave, a purple house, a yellow sun, and an orange shoe. Now we can tie the bluebird to Kris, because Birdly directly calls them a bluebird later. A fellow bluebird, in fact. A bluebird of misfortune, which is an intentional subversion of the bluebird of fortune, which is sort of like a folk concept about a bluebird bringing good fortune. So Kris is a bluebird of misfortune, which means they bring bad luck. Ralsei seems to correlate to the green wave rather well. After all, the roaring is said to be like an ocean of darkness, and so Ralsei being afraid of the ocean and this green wave, therefore representing that fear, makes a lot of sense. Susie with the pink house makes too much sense. Actually, you could say it's kind of purple. It's like her Dark World color. She has a lot of problems at home, at least as far as we can tell. And so that being perhaps her major fear does also make sense. The sun is an interesting symbol for us now. Going into Chapter 5, Toby has put a lot of emphasis on the sun going down. The sun going down is meant to represent the transition from our normal Deltarune experience into something darker, right? Literally, the sun, in terms of the light in the world, is going down. Something bad is going to happen. Noelle's fear being the sun is interesting, because you could take it one of two ways. Either she's afraid of the good times disappearing, as in she's afraid of the sunset, or her memories of the past are haunting her. Dess and Azrael and the whole friend group and just the past in general is something that she doesn't like to think about. Her greatest fear is that, which would make Dess's biggest struggle her inability to be special, right? Signified by this shoe. And as a symbol, the shoe is extra interesting, because shoes and feet in general obviously represent movement, as in the literal steps we take in life. And so for Dess, that might mean The shoe is her symbol because she is running away from her responsibilities by living in the dark world. Or perhaps she's just running away from a place she sees as constraining. In either case, you could argue that the shoe for her is a symbol of freedom. In other words, the Holiday family does not have freedom. The fact that Dess wants the shoe means she wants freedom. However, I don't want to end our discussion of symbols there, because there's one other symbol that I think is very important, and this kind of segues into it nicely. And that symbol is the hand. There's been a lot of talk about Kris losing their hand, because there's all this foreshadowing about the severed hand. Susie and Noelle talk about this in Chapter 4. In Chapter 2, if you put the Shadow Crystal, or Chapter 1, sorry. If you use the Shadow Crystal in the Light World, Kris puts it up to their hand and sees through it. The synopsis of the story about the severed hand says that one day the protagonist wakes up without a hand. All of these tie the hand to Kris as a symbol. And I mean that in the literary sense, as in it is a concept that represents a deeper theme in the story. Now, like we just discussed with the shoe, the hand also represents stuff in media all the time. It represents control, power, and the connection between our minds and bodies. We use our hands to interact with our environment, to exert our will over it, and to connect our thoughts with action. A great example is the phrase hand of the author, which is about how an author exerts their control over their world and characters. And so, the symbolism behind Kris's severed hand seems clear to me. Whether they literally lose their hand or not, Kris and the severing of this hand will represent our connection with them disappearing. Why? Because Kris is our hand. Metaphorically, Kris is how we interact with the world of Deltarune. They represent our control, our power. And so the severing of the hand would likely have to do with the soul leaving Kris forever, in some way or another. And this is really kind of laid on thick during the scene where we are trapped beneath the angel doll. Because during this scene, where Noelle and Susie first talk about the severed hand, we are severed from Kris. Like, we literally are. Susie even jokes, and if it is the severed hand, I get to keep it as a pet. And we know that love finds its way to the girl. So potentially this is all foreshadowing about the soul, our power, being transferred to Susie. And here's the thing. If that is the case, and the whole severed hand thing is about us being severed from Kris, why would Kris care? Doesn't Kris want to be severed from us? Well, yes, but actually no, right? Kris needs our power. It's spelled out in that phone conversation while Kris is making the chocolate milk. Without the soul, Kris cannot enter the dark world. Clearly, they have some plan going on with the night, and so they need us. And the last prophecy really seems to suggest that Susie might be dying, in my opinion. So perhaps the soul finding its way to her is a part of that, and they desperately don't want that to happen. A good example of someone with a metaphorical severed hand is Sham. Sham gave up their life and power as the court magician, and all it got them was their best friend sealed away and a withered existence. They even mused that if they hadn't been asked to lock him up, would they have found a little more purpose in their life? Also, just a little aside, if you liked my Sham friend theory that I posted last week, friend is shaped like a hand, so that could literally be a case of a second severed hand in the story, a reflection to what could happen to Kris. And we can synthesize all of these symbols into a very powerful prediction based on fucking Pluie. Of course, it's fucking Pluie. Toby did point out Pluie is important. Look at this image with me, okay? Look at it. We've got a weird conglomeration controlled by the soul. it's got one hand and two shoes, not feet, shoes. Here's the description for Pluie. Put on your shoe, hey, and sprint. It's raining cats and cats. Bring the chosen ones to the Ark. This goes back to some of my previous theories, so I'm going to try to explain this to you the best that I can. But this description is full of literary symbols. We have talked about how the shoe is a symbol for Dess and her struggles. The hand is a symbol for Kris and their struggles. The soul, well, that's us. We know that one. Rain foreshadows the coming of the roaring, because the roaring is likened to an ocean. In Chapter 4, when Susie is drawing on the window in the cafe with Kris, she literally says the rain comes down and washes it all away. Then later that same chapter, Gerson says that an ocean of ink will wash across the pages. The roaring is the ocean, and rain is the prelude. This one's a little bit of a stretch. Cats and cats being lighteners and darkeners. I basically came to this conclusion because those are two groups of things that kind of make sense in this context. Obviously, we know Friend is a cat and is a darkener. And like Catty and her family are cats and they're in the light world. So there are cats on both sides. But really, it's like lighteners and darkeners. It just kind of makes sense in this context. So let's just roll with that for now. Maybe it'll mean something else eventually, but hey. And then finally, we have the line, bring the chosen ones to the Ark. In Raise Up Your Bat, there's specifically a line that says, because I'm with you in the dark, with your heart as the ark that shall shine us the way, through the waves. Again, waves, ocean, roaring. Ark in the heart. So my interpretation of this is that the Ark is the shelter. That is why the knight is trying to bring people to the shelter. It's why the knight kidnapped Undyne and was trying to kidnap Toriel. They want people to go to the shelter so that they can be saved from the roaring when it occurs, because it will, because it's part of the prophecy. The shoe represents Dess, the hand represents Kris, and the soul represents us. If Dess is the knight, we can sort of understand this as Dess being the one guiding us, because, you know, the shoes connect with the earth, right? And they determine where the hand and us go. So quite literally, Dess is foraging the path forward as the knight. We, using Kris as our hand, are sparing the darkeners, or choosing not to. After all, you only have to bring the chosen ones to the Ark. You can choose not to bring people there. Kris also made the fountain where Undyne got kidnapped from. So far, she's the only kidnapping victim we know for sure happened. And it was a direct result of Kris making the Chapter 3 fountain. So this is sort of a prediction for what the end of Deltarune might be like. The roaring has occurred. The shelter is where we will bring both darkeners and lighteners during the roaring to try to save them. And perhaps, you know, after everything is said and done, the two worlds will be able to intermingle in some way. That would be the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed, whether it be the analysis or the theory or both. If you are a human Dess truther, I guess, no hard feelings, but hey, what can I say? Thanks for watching, like and subscribe. We've got a week, 6 days now. Okay, bye.